Hi, we continue the story in Luke 16 as Jesus spins the parable about the manager of injustice who's in a desperate situation since rumors have gone out that he's been squandering his master's property and he doesn't want to lose his job. So if you didn't watch the previous video on verses 1 to 3, I really encourage you to watch that before you watch this one. I went over some of these issues that scholars grapple with in dealing with this story, and if you're not familiar with that, I really encourage you to do that. But as we enter into the story here, we've gone up to this part, and the question is what he's decided to do. And this is a key moment where looking at the chiastic parallel in chapter 12, verse 42 is really important. This is the only other time where there is a mention of a faithful or prudent manager, and they're both there in the same way they're here. And interestingly, in this story, we can go back to that and look at it, but I'm not going to right now, you can. The story has nothing to do with the manager. It's really about a master and slaves, and this is mentioned with this question here, who then is this faithful and prudent manager? But then it goes on to ask the question about a slave preparing for the master's return. And scholars are often puzzling about that, because why bring up this question and not only not answer it, but not talk further about the manager? I'd like to suggest the reason it's there is to match the passage here, that Luke, in constructing his larger travel narrative, has intentionally put that story here, and we went around the first part of it, got through Jerusalem, and came back around this part of it, so that attentive readers would be able to put these pieces together. Not only that, it matches what we saw in the story before, which we looked at on the previous video when I noted the weight of shaping it, that this parable matches not only the one that follows about the rich man and Lazarus, but the father and the two sons. And we're on that point here around the question of finding a home. What's at issue for this manager, as we see here, is so that when he's dismissed, people will welcome him into his homes. And we'll have to see what that means. In the same way that the prodigal son needed to return home, finding himself sitting in the pigsty and realizing that he could be better off in his father's house. And they both end with celebration or commendation of behavior here, although the father doesn't commend the prodigal son's behavior other than the fact that he was dead and was alive, he was lost and is found. He obviously isn't praising as wasting the money, squandering the property. In fact, that's never commented on, but it is here. And so what we're going to have to look at, and I won't do it exactly today, I'll do it next time when we look at the Jesus commentary on the parable, is see how these two parables fit together around the question of property and the property of injustice, or as it'll be called here, the mammon of injustice in the verses in between. And that has to do a lot with the shape from Schallenberg that I noted last time that has this section here after it, explaining what's going on here. As I noted in the last video, many scholars see the parable as offering one message and this section offering another message, but I'll show more recent scholars have shown how nicely it all does fit together. So let's put up our, we'll leave up the structure here and we'll just go through our verses. So what the manager is doing here, deciding what to do, is calculating the cost, as we saw in 14:28. We can go back to that there. Which of you intending to build a tower does not first sit down and estimate the cost? And similarly, going out to war. And notice the sit down is common to both of them, and that's exactly what he tells the first debtor, sit down quickly. So he's sitting down, in a sense, mentally by deciding what to do so that he doesn't end up unemployed and homeless. And that's part of what he's being praised for being phronimos, which is to say prudent or worldly wise, as we might say. So I've decided what to do is literally, again, egnon to poiso, I know what I will make of the situation. So it's not about deciding, it's knowing. What to do when he's dismissed, marathatho, only here in Luke, but once in Acts, as manager, so that people may welcome me into their homes, using decomai, used earlier for welcome when Jesus sent out the apostles and the 70, and back here in chapter 10. So it's certainly the kind of welcome that echoes what we heard earlier there, when they went out with no money at all, no purse and nothing, and expected hospitality from others. Is he expecting charity, or what is it exactly he's expecting? Well, we'll have to see how it works out. As Herzog notes here, one of our best commentators on this parable, the steward has no future through an alliance with either merchants or peasants. And just parenthetically, Herzog notes that what we're seeing here has nothing to do with peasants. These are large commercial contracts way beyond the level of peasants. His prospects of employment rest with the ruling class. The reductions in the contracts were meant to send a message to the master, and we'll see that in just a minute. And he continues down here, and this is from Landry and May from the year 2000, much more recently, and an excellent article on this. Must mean that he wants to be welcomed into people's homes as a steward. To have any hope of future employment as a manager, the steward needs to salvage his reputation as a good, loyal steward, and the only way he can do this is to take good care of his master, to restore his master's honor. His actions in 16:5-7 are designed to do just this. And that's the key point, whether from Herzog or Landry and May. So many other modern scholars go, I don't understand what's going on here. What is his strategy, and why would the master praise him? But what's at issue is the honor and shame code and patronage-client codes, not really a formal code, but the social norm that makes the Roman Empire work. As I was saying last time, the fact that this manager has rumors about him that he's unjust or corrupt going around the community goes against the owner, or the master as he'll be called here, the Lord, Kyrios in Greek, as we see here as Kyrios, the Lord, because he has a bad manager, and it suggests either that he can't control his manager or that maybe he's corrupt as well. So the manager understands that the rumors of wasting wasting the property, squandering the property, is not just against himself but against his master. So if he can do something that will make the master look better, that will look good to him. And so he won't be welcomed into people's homes as charity. He'll be welcomed into people's homes as an effective manager. So here's what he does. He summons his master's debtors one by one, proskaleo, just as the master did to him just a few, here's 16:5, but he did to him just a couple of verses earlier. And it says he summoned his master's debtors one by one. Kreophilaton here, only here in Luke 7:41 elsewhere. And Herzog notes it's an argument for debtors not as farm tenants but as urban merchants. Because of their literacy, he tells them to write down a new amount on the bill, the size of the contract, the incentive to slander the steward as a, quote, weapon of the weak, using the work from James Scott that I've used in a number of other places to highlight how people in oppressive situations can talk to each other and make plans without their oppressors knowing that they're plotting resistance. And so spreading rumors is one way of doing that. And the phrase one by one here, and a cast on each one. And sometimes readers have been under the illusion that these two are the only ones, but plainly a lord of this kind, who has the enormous amount of contracts that we'll look at in the detail in a minute, must have more than two customers or two clients. And so these are just two examples to highlight this is a major master. This is somebody who's one of the titans of the Roman Empire. And we know there were 6 families that owned all the agricultural land of North Africa, the so-called latifundia. So in at least imagination, it could be someone like that. So he asked the first, how much do you owe my master? And one question people ask, if he's the manager, wouldn't he know? Ligri suggests the absence of written records, but Maruli, writing more recently, sees this as very speculative, and we have no reason to think there would not be written records. I'd suggest he doesn't know because there's so many. It implies that there's so many that he just can't keep track of them, and he's doing this very quickly. So he asks, how much do you owe? Philos here, as we've seen 2 other times, and here it's in the Lord's Prayer. So forgive us our debts is what's at issue here, and we'll look at that next time around the Jubilee theme that's at issue. And so the first one here, let's look at the amount and then we'll look at the note. He answered 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly and make it 50. 100 jugs is not 100 bottles. A jug here is a batus. This is 3,500 liters. Here's a 3,500 liter modern tank to get an idea of how much is at issue here. Trainer says below, the excessive amounts owed to the master illustrate his greed and his attitude to earth and its gifts represented in the oil and wheat. These fruits are for his own benefit and status. Their accumulation deprives others. And it also echoes the parable we saw in chapter 12 that will come up in its parallel with the rich man and Lazarus, where the land of a rich man produced abundantly. And so here's the exact same thing happening. The land is producing olives, and this debtor is transforming it into oil, and he's paying that back as his fee for using the land. So if his fee is 3,500 liters of oil, that's only a small percentage of his overall crop, so we can only imagine the sizes we're talking about here. So he says, take your bill, your grammata, which is your written thing, sit down, using an unusual word for sitting, only one other time there, and this is sitting at banquets, quickly, using a variation of what we saw in 1522, when the father said, quickly get the robe to protect the son from revenge or resentment from locals who would maybe stone him to death. And so he's doing this quickly before further rumors can spread, and he can go through all of these customers and debtors before the master finds out what's going on. So sit down quickly and make it 50, or literally right. And Herzog notes, any debtors literate enough to mark their accounts are not likely to be peasants. I think it's pretty clear that we're not talking peasants here. 50, which is a Jubilee number. Pentecost is 50, but that's not what's at issue here, because it's simply that it's half. As another scholar notes, a suggestion that this change preserves the true amount owed to the master but eliminates the commission owed. But there is much scholarly controversy about that, and I won't get into it because there's no consensus. But the older sense was he was cutting his interest, in other words, his commission. But as others have noted, not only is there no evidence of consumer goods being made at especially high interest rates, as Fitzmyer had written earlier, but it's not clear at all here how much is the manager's amount of profit and how much is the owner's amount of profit. So we're not going to worry about those details because we simply can't know. But in any event, this is going to make it better for the owners, we'll see. So then he goes to the next one, and as Herzog notes, whether in the village or market town, the peasants or merchants were indebted themselves to the steward in accepting the reduced contracts, and offstage will be obligated to repay the favor, but onstage they will praise the honor of their glorious patron and benefactor, the master. The master can either accept their praise and retain the steward, or cancel the renegotiated contracts and make a martyr out of the steward, which is to say that the customers, the debtors here, are receiving a great discount. They're being told, you had a $5,000 credit card bill, but we're going to reduce it to $2,500. And wouldn't they be grateful to whoever did that? And that gratitude is exactly what the patronage-client system is about. That in addition to being debtors to this person, now they could be clients. Now they could owe him public praise for what a generous and kind owner he is, and that would be to his benefit. Let's look at the second one here before we get too much to the conclusion. Because if we thought 3,500 liters of olive oil is a lot, wait till we see what's at issue here. 100 containers, which is a core. But a core is 22 is enough to make 22,000 liters of wheat. 22. I was trying to find a picture of that much wheat, and I could not. But that's a huge amount. It's 6 times as much in volume as the olive oil. So these are huge commercial contracts. And he said to him, take your bill and make it 80. And we'll only go down to the first part of verse 8, because then we'll look at the next part next time when we see the master. And this is what leads some to hear this as a stand-in for God. But not every kurios is a stand-in for God. And in fact, we hear in the center, you cannot serve 2 lords. And so we certainly know there are multiple lords at issue. And we here see in my note down below from Schellenberg, whereas within the world of the parable, faithfulness means loyalty to the master's interests, in this case the meticulous collection of debts. In Luke's embedding narrative, loyalty to one's Lord means participation in Jesus' program of release, which is to say Jubilee. Simply stated, the criteria of faithful stewardship depends on which kurios one is serving, and that was the point I was just making. So the master commends or praises here, aponio, only here in Luke, and as Landry and May note here, the steward's actions make his master appear generous, charitable, and law-abiding. The debtors and anyone in the community who hears about this will presume that this act of charity was done at the request of the master. And so the master commended, and this is where many scholars, or certainly readers who don't know the Greek, get tangled, because they wonder if he's a dishonest manager, why is he being commended? And what has he done that's dishonest? And the issue is the translation, because adikias means unjust. It's here and in the next verse. And as Schellenberg argues, his injustice can't be his use of his master's resources, which is praised, nor his self-interest, which is taken for granted. Rather, Schellenberg says, it's said to be tes dikas, which is to say unjust, because his plan is calculated to elicit reciprocation from his newly generated clients. But is that unjust? I'd like to suggest it's something bigger than that, and the scholars are not looking widely enough. What's at issue here, as it will be called here, is the mammon of injustice here, which is twice in Jesus' explanation. And I know I'm going ahead because I said I would stop here, but to make sense of this first half of the phrase, we have to recognize that what's at issue is the entire imperial economy. That Luke is showing these enormous amounts of debts whether to the Pharisees representing his elite audience, or to the tax collectors and sinners and the disciples who were also listening to this, the incredible gap between those handful of people at the top who run the empire and everybody else who's scrambling to make ends meet. Like the shepherd who is searching desperately for the one lost sheep, and like the woman searching for a coin at the beginning of chapter 15. So we've come fully around from one end of the economic spectrum to the other. And in this case, this person caught within the system of injustice has used it to his own benefit, to his master's benefit, and to the client's benefit. And the master praises him for that, and so does Jesus. And Jesus will tell his audience to be like him. So to make sense of that, we'll look at it next time. See you then for that. Bye-bye.